Start this. This is just a recording.
We're going to start with.
Oh, I mean, we could run it through. I could wipe this out. We could
Oh,
run it through.
okay. I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1923. We settled in Chicago in about 1930, 36 or 37.
Okay, so do you remember anything about Cincinnati?
Well, not really, because I was only there until I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
I did start the school there. The one interesting thing about Cincinnati that I knew that I wasn't aware of then, but later became aware of, that there were such few black families in Cincinnati at the time that it wasn't segregated.
Okay.
The schools were not segregated, and of course, living was segregated, maybe to just a house, but the blocks were not
Okay.
not so segregated. There wasn't enough people to segregate. We moved to Chicago. I lived on the south side of Chicago, and that's where I grew up.
Okay.
I went to school, went to segregated schools. I never saw a black teacher. There was only black students in the school that I went to, the schools that I went to in Chicago. And when I got to high school, the high school that I went to was somewhat integrated, maybe 20% black, 25% black, and the rest white. And from there, I went to the Art Institute.
Okay.
But in the process of growing up in Chicago, it was during the Depression. It was also during the the unions were organizing.
Mm-hmm.
And within the black community, there were certain, I'm just trying to think of what you were aware of as a child.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I do remember a movement in the community was don't shop where you can't ring the cash register. And what the procedure there was that they would have a black person working in the store, and they could wait on you, but you didn't give them the money.
Mm-hmm.
You gave the money to the owner. And this thing was, if you can't ring the cash register, don't shop there. As a young child, I don't remember any other really movements or what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that within my family, which was a very interesting family, it was a second generation from slavery, no formal education. Some of them could read and some of them could not read. My uncle, who could not read, used to listen to the news on the radio. My mother could read, and they used to get into arguments, especially about what was going on in Ethiopia when Mussolini went into Ethiopia.
Okay.
Well, my mother thought this was absolutely a horrible thing and how he was taking advantage. And my uncle said, well, really, these people needed help because they're running around naked with spears. And my mother said, they're not running around naked with spears. They're people with clothes. And as I said, she read.
Mm-hmm.
Also, an early memory I have of my mother is that we used to go to the library. We went to the library frequently. So she was a reader. However, I know that her education was not, I think she went to high school 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
She never told me that because she didn't want me to know.
Mm-hmm.
Not that she didn't want me to know, it wasn't something that she was proud of having not gone to high school. But she was an avid reader. So that little bit, I would hear arguments within the family about political things going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to the Art Institute, as I say, that was that particular era, the 30s, the late 30s, was a lot of union organizing. And also there was all kinds of, the youth was quite organized. At that time, I think the Communist Party was quite active, the Socialist Party, all these parties were active, and they had youth groups. And for some reason, the art students, whether they were rich or whatever they called themselves some kind of socialists. So at the Art Institute, at lunchtime, they'd have debates. After school, outside the Art Institute is the two lions that sit on the front of it. And after school, you would sit up on that thing while these socialist groups preach sermons. I'm saying all that to say that coming from a segregated black community, you are aware that there's racial prejudice. You're aware of problems within your community. But to get there and find out that your problems are not isolated, that your problems are social problems, that affect what affects you really affects the world. What's going on in the world, what's going on someplace else really affects you. When Trotsky was assassinated in Mexico, I remember one of the art students came in, he was all upset. I didn't know who the hell Trotsky was, but at that particular time, but it was a concern. And at this point in my life, I began to open up and see more than my neighborhood.
Right.
I began to see more than just the city of Chicago. For the first time, I met native Palestinians, Palestinian Jews. And I was amazed because they didn't look like the Jews that I knew in my neighborhood. They looked like Arabs. They were dark with kinky hair, but they were Jews. They were Palestinian Jews. So a whole new thing opened up to me that I think affected my life even today. That I'm not an isolationist. I'm aware of everything that goes on in the world, and it's reflected in my art. Also, I had a friend whose father, she was Jewish. Her father was a fur worker, and she was telling me the stories of how the men they did a sit-in, a lock-in. And the children would come and bring food, sneak around the back and bring food to the fathers. And all these things were, as I say, very new to me, but had an effect on a tremendous effect on my life. Well, I went to the Art Institute. I learned a lot about art, and I learned a lot about the world. A whole new thing opens up to me. Of course, when you graduate in Chicago, you're going to become a great artist, but to do that, you have to go to New York. And as we graduated, and I had several friends who had graduated before, and they were living in New York. And so I went to New York, and we lived in a tenement, I guess you call it a tenement. It was on the east, right on the East River, down on Cherry Street, which is was the last street down there, and that was right off the East River, and there was 3 buildings, and within those 3 buildings where a lot of the art students had settled. But that was an interesting learning process for me, because for the first time, the rest of the building was first generation Jewish, which I found to be a very, very interesting people, because they were so completely honest. I can't describe the honesty of these people. So when I say honesty, they were not racist. And therefore, when they talk to you as a person. Now, some of the things they said was very insulting, they were not talking to me as a black person.
Right.
They were talking to me as a person.
Right.
And I remember one time we went away for vacation. We went to camp for a week, and I had a dog and a cat. My roommate, and when we came back, the little old ladies, they weren't little old ladies. They would sit out on the park, and they'd be out in front of the house. And when we came out, the one of them says to the other, they talk about you, but you can hear them. They said, the Hund, which was a dog in Yiddish, the Hund and the Cuts can go on vacation, but poor people like us, we don't get a vacation. Because we took it. But also, they had the big mailbox in the building. When the mailman came, he opened it up, and then there was slots, and he put the mail in. And whenever he brought the mail, the ladies they'd stand and they'd see everything, who got mail and all. And one time, it's a friend of mine. I met him for lunch or dinner or something, and he said, "You know, I came by your house, and the lady told me that you got a job." I said, "Well, how in the heck did she know I got a job?" And I figured out I was getting unemployment, and at that time they mail your checks to you. So I guess they could see I was getting unemployment checks. But I went out every day, and I guess they noticed when I came back around lunchtime that I hadn't found a job, and that I didn't come back. They realized I found a job. That's why I'm saying they were very interesting people. They were in your business, but they weren't hostile. They weren't evil. They weren't to do you any harm. They were very interesting people. So let's get away from that. And in New York, well, the one thing in New York I found, and I guess it still goes on, every day when you get off from work, if you wanted to get on a picket line, there was a demonstration someplace. in the park. But I attended a lot of things. They used to have street meetings at that time, you know, political street meetings and stuff like that. And also during that time, I got married. And we were both working in New Jersey. We had a friend who lived in New Jersey, and she said, "Well, if I find you an apartment, why don't you just move to New Jersey, to Newark?" And that's how we got to Newark.
Okay.
Now, all the while, I'm going to go to, all the while,
Do you know what year you got to Newark?
1952, maybe.
Okay. That's okay.
But see, all the time in New York, I was doing freelance artwork, which
Right.
was, I should have left that out. That's a very hilarious part of the story.
Well,
And
put
it's
it
what
in.
the artists who spend all this money going to art school and getting an art education. You come to New York and you're going to become famous. But what you end up in is in the garment industry. At that particular time, the fad was hand-painted. Hand-painted T-shirts, hand-painted turtles, hand-painted shower curtains, hand-painted blouse. Everything's hand-painted. Hand-painted wallets. And that's what the young artist was doing, hand-painting. And if you're hand-painting here, you're getting 30 cents a wallet. But your friend is doing shower curtains, and they're getting 50 cents a curtain. So you quit here and you go to
Where the money is.
yeah, you just ran from one thing to the other. So when I came to New Jersey, at that time I was working at the Greystone. That was the rental institution in Morristown. I was working in the what was it called? Anyway, I was working in the occupational therapy department there, and I stayed there for a few years. In fact, until I had my first child. And so after that, most of what I was doing was freelance, you know, posters, T-shirts, or whatever it takes to make a buck. Hand paint. They did have some hand painting shops here in Newark. Then, when I really became when we first came to Newark, I don't remember the case now. There was a case of police brutality, and I don't know. I don't remember what it was. I don't know. The guy, I think he just got out the army. He had his they call it mustering out pay or something, and the police shot him. And at the time, the family said he had his money on him, but when they got the body, the money wasn't there, and the police was accused of taking the money. And there was a demonstration here in Newark, and that was my first taste of activity here in Newark.
When you moved to Newark, was there certain parts of Newark you could live in, and others maybe they would steer you away from, or was it integrated?
I didn't know that much. See, we didn't know that much about Newark at the time.
Okay.
Of course. But where we lived was in the South Ward. Not having children, before we had children, we still spent a lot of our time in New York.
Okay.
Weekends we went to New York. Once we had children was when we really got in to the nitty-gritty of Newark.
Okay.
And that began with the school system. When my daughter started school, Newark was very upset then because I tell you, the block that we moved in, that we lived on, was okay. Anyway, let me think a minute. I can't think of it right now. Anyway, the block that we lived on was changing.
Right.
Black people were buying homes there in this particular neighborhood. And it was all doctors who had been on those blocks. So that was at this time, that's when I had my daughter. And I'm trying to think of the name. I don't know why I can't think of the name of the street, but I will. Because it's important. It's very important.
Maybe if you start telling the story, the block will come to you.
I don't know why I can't think of it. I'm still down on Cherry Street in New York. That's what the problem is.
Is there something more about Cherry Street that you want to add? Or just enjoy and remember it?
No. Anyway, the block was all doctors on the block. Few black families had houses there. The doctors were families, it was homes. And they had their offices within their houses or something like that.
I remember that.
And they had these nursemaids, or I guess you call them nannies. But anyway, my first reaction was, they hired these women. They paid them I'm sure they paid them very little money. But because I lived on the block and I used to walk to the store and stuff, and I had my little girl in the stroller, well, the little nursemaids, they were all black. They would talk to me and we would have conversations. and they'd be slapping their little kids around. And I'm thinking to myself, how can you hire somebody that has no skill or no training to take care of your most precious possession? See, because to me, my child was my most precious possession.
I agree
And
with
if
you
I
on that.
had somebody taking care of my child, it would be somebody who knew how to deal with a child.
Mhm.
So anyway, that was my first impression of the neighborhood in which I was living. Then I had these nice little mothers whose husbands were not doctors, but maybe they had something to do with maybe male nurses or something. I remember one of my neighbors, the white lady, and she was telling me about something about her girl did something, and I'm listening to her about her girl, and I thought, well, why would you give this to your girl? I thought she was talking about her child. She's talking about her maid. You know, this is all very new to me because I was not raised with a maid,
Uh-huh.
and I did not associate with people who had maids, so I didn't know this. As I say, I'm telling you things that was opened up to me. Anyway, on this block, of course, these doctors' children went to Avon Avenue School. And when my daughter got old enough to go, before she was old enough to go to school, I was aware of what was going on. And what happened was that they were getting very upset that black people were moving into the neighborhood. And they were going to be going to the school. So what happened was the city built a Clinton Place Junior High School. Therefore, as these kids grew up, the white kids grew up, as they got to 5th and 6th grade, they would be out of the school. You know, they didn't have to go to school with these black kids. And of course, when my daughter went into the school system, we started attending all PTA meetings and Board of Education meetings. And that is what mostly I'm going to talk from, my experience in these things, which were just horrifying.
Okay.
As far as school segregation went. I know the street that I lived on was Baldwin Avenue.
Okay.
That was a very high class block at that time. So when my daughter went to school, by the time my daughter went to school, the principal was, she was really not a very nice lady. She was not happy to have these black kids in her school. And when she met with the parents, she was very arrogant. And I don't remember the particular issue. Oh, I know what it was. She had a kindergarten, but she decided she was going to have 2 kindergartens. So she had the white kids in one kindergarten and the black kids in another kindergarten. Well, we took her up on that issue. And oh no, that wasn't the issue. And she went on, that was not the issue. And the kindergarten teacher, in fact, the kindergarten teacher that was teaching the white kids was a black teacher, and she had her speak to us as though she was going to make some kind of difference in our attitudes. But anyway, they did get the schools separated, and she immediately got herself. She just couldn't. This principal. I'm going to deal with her because we came in contact another time. Now this is 1953, let's see, 53, 5, this is about 1958 when my daughter went to kindergarten. So this is 1958. And the schools were going into split sessions. So we were going down to the Board of Education meeting. The Board of Education was appointed by the mayor.
Mhm.
And these Board of Education members did not have children in the public school. I remember one issue of this one man who was appointed. I think he had something like 7 or 8 children, and they all went to Catholic school. And this hit me right across the face. Why in the hell does he sit on a board that decides policy for my child when he does not have a child in that system? And this really, well, I keep saying me, my husband also.
Mhm.
So we went to board meetings and we spoke, and you had to put your name down to speak at a board meeting. So we just put our names down for every single board meeting, whether we were going to speak or not. So, but anyway, when we left Avon Avenue School, we moved we moved on Seymour Avenue. We bought a house. And my daughter was then transferred to Peshine Avenue School. And Peshine Avenue School was one of the Newark schools that was on split sessions. That was
Split sessions.
Split sessions was that you had a group of kids that started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they went from 8 to 12.
Mm.
And the other kids went from 11:30 or something to 3. Anyway, the school was overcrowded.
Mm.
And so anyway, we found out. Also, I left something out.
Okay.
In on Baldwin Avenue. I hate to go into all this. Anyway, I'll go into it. You can edit out what you don't want in there, because this I'm giving my opinion.
It's okay. That's what oral history is.
On Baldwin Avenue, as more black people began to move in, and the doctors began to move out, some group called itself, what's his name, Stanley Winters and his wife and a few other people in the community. These are all white people. Well, it was a Jewish community. When I say Jewish, it's not to be anti-Semitic.
Mhm.
It's just that it was a Jewish community.
Right.
That's what it was. And they formed something called the Clinton Hill Neighborhood Association. Well, my husband was a political freak. No, he read all the time.
Mm. Okay.
If he was talking to you right now, he would want to know where your parents were from, and when this and everything that was going on in that country.
Mhm.
Who was the czar this, or who was this and that. He just read history.
Mhm.
And so anyway, he said, so they had a meeting. So he said, my husband, he goes to every meeting. So I have to go to the meeting. We go to the meeting. And he says to them, why is it you live very peacefully together all these years, but as soon as black people will come into the community, why do you have to have association now? What is this? Is this to control the black people? Oh no, that's not it. We want to, we want them to know that they're welcome. And he said, well, they can just be welcome without you having to form a whole organization. And then, so in it, they start having meetings. And one of the black people said, well, she had a complaint. Her complaint was that her neighbor, who was Jewish, was hanging clothes on the clothesline on Sunday, which is Sabbath. So then you have to say her, that's not her Sabbath, that's your Sabbath, Then there was a black family that bought a big house. And the Friends of Clinton Hill, they say, well, they would like to have a committee to go and meet with them, because it's just a couple, it's a middle-aged couple, and they bought this big house, and we'd like to know if they're going to turn it into a rooming house. So my husband says, that's not your business. Well, we can't have a room. That's against the ordinance. He said, well, that's legal. The law will take care of that. Well, we would like to know. So my husband said, "Well, I'd like to be on the committee that goes to talk to these people." But anyway, that was their thing. That was the Clinton Hill Neighborhood Association. I'm trying to think if they did anything in particular. Now, then we moved to Seymour Avenue. And the very interesting thing, the group of people who were in Clinton Hill and formed that organization, they moved also to the Weequahic section, and they formed the Weequahic Tenants Association because they were Jewish, see, and they were moving out of that neighborhood. They didn't realize that they were really part of this whole segregation. They didn't realize that they were participating in segregation.
Yeah, they just.
They don't realize it. Anyway, so they moved over to Weequahic. And then they formed the Weequahic Tenants Association or something like that. And they were, some of the parents I was very friendly with. Our children were the same age, etc. And we used to take our children to the library. And now very interesting, their children went to Maple Avenue School. My children were going to Peshine Avenue School. The children across the street from us was going to Hawthorne Avenue School. That's the way it was divided up. Well, Peshine was the only school that was on split sessions within the area. And what we did, we go to board meetings, you have to do something about the split sessions, you have to build more schools, blah, 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 blah. And then there were schools that didn't have enough students in it. So we said, transfer. Then that's when all this busing came up to desegregate the schools. It's some sort of nonsense. The parents, I have to give them credit, these Jewish parents whose children were in Maple Avenue School. One day they went through the school and took a count of each class. This first grade class in room 103. There's only 11 students. But there's, how many vacancies? There's only 11 students in that class, another class. So they figured out how many students, I think in each class and how many they could take. The interesting thing in Maple Avenue School was the same principal that had been at Avon Avenue School that was almost crazy because all these black kids were moving in. So what they did, we met afterwards, and they told us how many vacancies and how who had children, and they formed what they did was they planned on a certain day that these parents, if you had fourth graders and they gave you the room something that had space for fourth graders, and that you would go over to the school, would all march over to the school and asked the principal if she could enroll the students, and of course she couldn't. So you would just go right on up to the room and take your child and seat your child in that classroom. Well, they did that. And this principal went berserk. She called the police, she called the parents, and told them that the school was, I don't know what it was, but it turned out to be practically a circus because there's all these little mothers down there with curls in their hair and bedroom slippers on, coming to rescue their children from the black folks. But anyway, that was the one thing that we did. Eventually, Peshine, they built the annex onto the school, etc., and my children. But we continued to go to board meetings. Now, I'm going to deal with the educational thing of Newark. At that time, they had no black administrators in the Newark school system. In fact, at that particular time, I'm not sure how many teachers, they had a system here in Newark that they don't call they're called long-term substitutes, okay? The substitute come in, not the first day of school, but the second day of school, and they work the whole year. And the day before school closes is their last day. So therefore, they didn't work the whole year. So they're continued substitutes. There was a lot of black teachers in that category. There were no black administrators. And Dr. Alma Flagg, and I don't remember who the other people were, when they could see, the black administrators could pass the written exam, but they could never pass the oral. They just didn't answer the questions right, you know. So therefore, you had no black administrators. So Dr. Flagg and I think 3 other, I don't remember all of that, they got an injunction because the board had met and they had appointed principals. These people got an injunction against these people being put on their jobs. They held up the appointments. And eventually, you know, this problem was solved. But those are things that I'm familiar with Newark and its racism in education. And it's of course, the housing. The housing is, as I say, not as I say, but it was segregated. And as white people, see the illustrate guys, they played a big role in this, including black real estate agents. They were just as bad. I remember one, his name was Knight, and he worked for, I've forgotten the name of the big real estate agent here in Newark. And he bought a house over on a street in Weequahic section where there were no black people. He bought a house. And my husband very jokingly said, I hope the people don't start moving out. He said, I hope they do. He said, that's why I bought the house. Now, he was a black real estate agent. He said, that's why I bought the house there. He says, so I can, and he did. He sold it out. So the real estate agents played a big part in keeping segregation and white people moving out. Now, most of the people that I knew from the Clinton Hill Association, the Weequahic Association, my nice white friends, they moved from Clinton Hill to Weequahic to out of Newark. I don't know, my daughter made a joke. You don't have to put this in or you can take it out, but my daughter made a joke. She said after the riots that the Jewish people exited Newark. She said, but the Italian says, we'll stay here and fight. You know, in the North War, they said, we'll stay here and fight. But that's what happened. Now, let's go to the riots. Which
that's what I was just going to ask
having
you.
To live in it and
revolt.
And to read about it in the paper and have other people write about it. Thing number one, the section that I lived in, which was the South Ward, was not as devastated or was not as affected as the Central Ward was along Springfield Avenue. And I want to go into a little history of my understanding, political understanding of this. In this country, let's go all the way back. Let's go back to the south side of Chicago. Let's go to any city
Mhm.
in the United States. And let's deal with anti-Semitism. Jews, if they were very rich, they could own big businesses downtown. And all Jews are not rich, as
No.
people may think, you know. I can tell them on the east side of New York, that whole east side there was no rich Jews over there, but it was all Jews. When they have a business, a store, the only place they could in Chicago, they could have a store in a black neighborhood. They weren't going to have they weren't going to have a very flourishing business in an Irish neighborhood. They weren't going to have a flourishing fish store in an Irish neighborhood or in a Polish neighborhood. They would have one in a Jewish neighborhood, or they would have one in a black neighborhood. So with businesses, the two groups were thrown together. Okay? Now, whatever conflicts, sometimes there are conflicts in business. Whatever conflicts or friends, and we got cheated, so the Jews cheated us. But these two groups have been thrown together as business people. So in Newark, Springfield Avenue was a whole string of Jewish businesses. Black people bought things on time or whatever. But these two groups were thrown together, and therefore when the conflict arose, that's where the biggest rioting went on. And I don't think it was necessarily people who had been doing business with these people, but it was just what you call scapegoats. That's part of it. The neighborhood that we lived in, let's see, in the Weequahic section, along Bergen Street, there were Jewish businesses. There was also black businesses. And there wasn't the morning after, the night that the riot started, my husband was at a Board of Education meeting. I wasn't at the meeting. By this time, we had 3 kids. He was at the meeting, I wasn't. And he said that someone came in and said, we better get out of here and get home because there's rioting in the street. And my husband was one of these people who, instead of running away from the thing, he always runs to it. So he went out to see exactly, and he said it wasn't that much. He said the way he was talking, I thought the whole city was in uproar. He said, he said he drove home, he didn't see anything. Because he didn't go through Springfield Avenue, but he said he didn't see anything. And then when he came up and around, nothing. The next day, I was looking out my window and I saw a woman walking with this beautiful chair, holding this beautiful chair. There was an upholstery business on Bergen Street. There wasn't a lot of looting, but what a friend of mine she was white, she lived a block down. She said when she went to come home, the police said, well, you can't come home. She said, but I live here, I'm going home. They say, well, it isn't safe. She said, well, if I live here, it's safe. And so it wasn't, let's say, it wasn't all over the city. It was confined to a area of the city. They had the National Guard came in. Now on Bergen Street, it was very interesting. The National Guard themselves busted a lot of windows. They busted windows, and the kid, now what it was, this kid that lived across the street from me, he came home with a whole bunch of sneakers, and his mother had a fit. She said, what? He said, well, the policemen, they told us, they broke the window and told us we could take whatever we wanted.
Make it look like it was bigger than it was.
Yeah, they did that, but in the area where they really really killed people, where they really was a Central War.
Mm.
The police, the National Guard, everything, they just gave them a good punishment. But that was the poorest section of the city also.
Yeah.
Those are the people that take the brunt of everything. Now, let's see. After the riots, previous to the riots though, there was a South Ward councilman. His name was Lee Bernstein. And Lee Bernstein and I were having a conversation. He owned some buildings.
Mm.
And he was telling me about how nasty the people were. That's why they had rats and roaches and you know, they just breed them. I said, no, they don't just breed them. Oh, yes, and he's going on about, you know, how the black folks do this, how they live, blah, 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 blah. And he said, and you know, all the white people are going to move out of Newark. This was before the riots.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you know, the white people are moving out of Newark. I said, well, that's their problem.
Mm-hmm.
See, if they want to leave the city and leave it to the black folks, I said, we'll manage. But anyway, so the white people moved out, and they all did move out. And as Newark settled down from the riots, let's say they left they sort of really just left the city. And that's when I decided to open, I saw a nice place that I would like to have an art gallery. At this particular time, my children were, in high school. In fact, I think my youngest one was like 7 or 8 years old. And he was going to school right around the corner. So I decided to open an art gallery. And the reason being was that all these years I was just doing, as I say, freelance artwork and stuff like that. And I really wanted to get into my art. And so I figured if I had a place where I could work, you know, away from home, and if you call it an art gallery, it justifies a free space. And that's what I did. I opened up the art gallery, and to my surprise, because I was still going to New York for art. I did go to the Newark Museum, but, you know, for exhibits or something. And the library had some art stuff. But most of my art doing was in New York. And when I opened up the gallery, that was a very interesting thing, because what happened was artists sort of came from everywhere. In fact, I had wanted to have an exhibit, and I knew one artist in Newark, and she was a student at Montclair. That was the only artist I knew. So when I opened up the gallery, I wanted her to have an exhibit. Well, she said, "Oh no, she. By this time she was finished at Montclair. She was a teacher, and she said, "Oh, I know," and I convinced her to have an exhibit. And I figured maybe 10 or 15 people would show up. Well, about 50 people from all around came to the art gallery, and I was amazed. She was amazed. And from that point, you had artists in Jersey City, you had artists in East Orange, you had artists in Newark, but they all went to New York. Or if they were, there was no exhibiting, there was no exhibit space for them, and I didn't realize that. And this young man, he said he was riding down the street on his bicycle, and he saw this sign that said art gallery. So he said, an art gallery in Newark? So he said he rode around the block and he came back. And he came in. And actually, what the gallery became, it became a, if I had had a business sense, which I had no business sense, I was an artist. if I had had a business sense, it would have been something really great. Because in that community, it was at the bus stop, I had more people from the neighborhood who would just stop in to see what's there. Some people had never seen original artwork. You know, they see prints and stuff like that. Some people who had an interest in art would stop in, and it really became quite a central place for people. The artists themselves, I allowed anybody to exhibit. And I'm going to talk about one particular person. He came in and he wanted to know if he could have an exhibit. I said, sure. Let me see what you got. Well, he had this stuff. I said, okay, so I explained to him how we go about having an exhibit, and it has to be framed and this and that and all that. And he did all that, and what he did, I could have screamed. On each painting, in orange paint, he painted his name. And so I told him, don't ever do that again. But that was, 40, 50 years ago? Do you know today he is a very, very good sculptor. He does, he's selling work all over, and he's done these fantastic, he's made these fantastic chess pieces, which he sells all over the world.
Nice.
But, and then I had experience with people.
So basically you opened the space up for him to thrive.
Yeah, I was just amazed with him. But the young artists, I think the interesting thing is that the artists who came through my gallery are functioning today. I mean, they went on to, as I say, I didn't realize it was going to be that. Now, in Newark, there were artists, but they were not interested in exhibiting in Newark. They were white artists. They exhibited in corporates. Rutgers had a Women's Caucus for Art. Judy Brodsky was, she's still affiliated with Rutgers and the National Arts Council and all kinds of things like that. But anyway, she was in Rutgers, Newark, and she had an organization of women artists, and it was called the Women's Caucus for Art. So anyway, me and a couple of other women in my group, we joined them, and they had exhibits, but not in Newark. Their exhibits were in the corporates outside of Newark. We exhibited exclusively in Newark. And nobody was, it was, I don't know how to describe it. It was just a virgin field for us, for black artists, because nobody wanted to exhibit in Newark, and we were exhibiting in Newark. And the corporates opened up, I mean, the ones right here in the city, National, what's that, National Bank. They gave us a beautiful space to exhibit in. New Jersey Bell, the Woodson Foundation, the library, the Newark Museum. We had a big exhibit there. I'm trying to think of all the places that we exhibited. So we would have at least 2 or 3 exhibits a year here in Newark. So for that whole period from the 1970s on up through the almost up to 2000, we were the only ones exhibiting in Newark. And now it's just fabulous. Now you have Newark Express. You have a lot of galleries in Newark now, and a lot of young artists. But at that time, none of the artists wanted to come to Newark. There was no, they didn't see anything here. So that I feel really good about. As you say, I did not intend to make Newark a central art thing. But
that's what you did.
But that's what it is now.
Yeah, I know. NJ Pack does stuff, and You go Route 21. You have all that art along there.
Yeah, right.
You know,
Yeah.
I was just looking at that coming.
Now
Coming into
back to
town.
NJ Pack. What? Oh, I forgot. Now we did. We formed a women's art group, Black Women Visual Perspective. But also, I left somebody out, and she's very important. Liz Del Tufo. Have you ever heard of her? No.
That name rings a bell. Yes.
Oh yeah. Well, Liz Del Tufo, as we call her, Miss Newark, because she and Emma Fantone used to do the tours of Newark,
Mhm.
and they knew every little thing about the city of Newark. And Liz Del Tufo, at the time that, I'm trying to think, Peter Shapiro was elected Essex County, what's he called? Whatever, who's in charge of Essex County freeholders.
Freehold. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the head of that. And when he came in, he brought Liz Del Tufo was on his staff, and they established the arts and culture in the Essex. They never had anything like that in the Essex County freehold.
Right.
And they called something arts and culture. And so anyway, she established that. And that was a big help to us artists because they gave us another exhibit space, was the county building. In fact, every year we would have Black History exhibit in the county,
Right.
county building, yeah. And she formed the Newark Arts Council. And at that time, I can't think of the guy who established NJ Pack. Anyway, he was on the Arts Council. There's a lot of people on the Arts Council. And from that, he decided to do the NJ Pack. You know, coming out from the Arts Council. Arts Council didn't have anything to do with it, but he was one of the board members of the Arts Council.
Okay. And he set up what the whole NJ Pack based on the Arts Council.
No.
Oh.
He just happened to be a board member.
Okay. I was
The
trying.
Arts Council can't take credit for that. Because it wasn't easy for him to really get it done through. Is there anything else? I'm probably going to think of a million things I should say.
Yeah. Let me go my notes here just 1 second.
I'll talk a little bit on the art gallery now. The corner that I was on, that was more. I think more drugs were sold on that corner. That was for the weekweek section. That was the drug dealers' haven. But that did not affect the gallery. It was very interesting. I brought that up because this little guy, I don't remember his name now, he came into the gallery and he saw this painting and he said, "Oh, I'm going to buy that." And I said, "Okay." He said, "How much?" And I told him how much it was. I said, I'll give you a discount. And he said, "Okay." So he said, "I'll put down," I think he put down, he said, "I'll put down $20. So he put down $20. About an hour and a half later, he come back. He said, here's another $30. Do you know that by the end of the day, he had paid me $350 for painting. Now, I say that because he is somebody who would never have owned an original piece of art. And the fact that there was
Except
something
you were
there
there.
that appealed to him. I always felt good about that. So at the end of the day, he took his painting and he left.
Yeah, and otherwise, he would have been isolated from being able to even see it, let alone buy it.
Exactly. See, yeah, that's another thing about a gallery in the community, and that is, how many people will go down to the Newark Museum?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I was on the board of the Newark, when the Arts Council, when the Arts Council first set up, and Liz set it up, and we met for about 2 years, and we really weren't getting anywhere. So we decided, well, we'll pay somebody to do a study. So we paid some woman, I think she was from St. Louis or somewhere. She came here and she did a study. And she told us, she said, the first place we needed a full-time paid employee.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a stable headquarters. See, we were just meeting anywhere. We
Mhm.
set a board. We didn't have anybody in charge. And she said, you need satellites in the community. She
Yeah.
said, you need little arch spaces in the community. Now, they did everything, but they didn't do the little art communities
Mm-hmm.
in the community. They didn't do the little arts things in the community. They just, everything is focused downtown.
Right. And I would think the community is what you're trying to reach. So that would be.
Well, they're not, right now they're involved in, they raise tremendous amounts of money,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what they're involved in.
Mm-hmm.
But the community, and they don't have, another thing, well, I'm not gonna criticize the board. I mean, you know, when you found an organization 20 years later, it's not, it may or may not be what you
Yeah.
hoped it would be.
Yeah. I know. I see that with the Bayonne Little League. My father helped set that up, and he helped build the Little League stadium back in the '60s so we could play baseball. And it was built because we grew up in projects. It was built so that people could play baseball free, and now they charge it exorbitant free.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
you know,
For Newark now, as far as the art thing, which was what was more of what I was concerned with
Mhm.
art. Well, I was concerned with art and the educational,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
the educational system, which I hope is going to improve.
I was going to ask that, how has it from that time to now? What differences do you see?
With the educational system?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Well, from the time that my kids were there. Oh, let me go back, because I did bring up a point that the board was appointed.
Mm-hmm.
And they're appointed by the mayor, and what the mayor appointed were friends.
Yeah.
Or somebody who really didn't knew or cared nothing about education. Then we made, there was a whole move within the city to have an elected board.
Mm.
And that finally, I don't remember what year that was won, but anyway, they had an elected board. And then the city took over the school system. The city took over the schools. And once the cities took over the schools, they went down. They really went way, 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 way down. As far as
Was that in part maybe did they take money away from it, or because
basically what they did, and that's a problem that happens in the city. I don't know if it happens in other cities. Is you bring somebody from outside in, and every city has its own
rhythm.
then yeah, it has its own thing. And you bring somebody from outside. Now, I know they brought in this one person, and what she did was painted all the buildings or something. I don't know what that was supposed to include. And she had her own board, but they had a board that had no power. It was an advisory board, which has no power. And the last one they had, not the last one, but before the last one, look, let's put it this way, let's be honest about it. In my opinion, there's a move against free public education.
Mm.
There's a move toward charter schools.
Mhm.
And I find that very interesting that the charter schools are in Black and Puerto Rican and minority all over the country.
Yep.
You don't have it if you don't have a charter. If the charter schools are so much better, you don't have them in white communities, poor white communities maybe, but you don't have it.
True.
It isn't an improvement of the educational system. From what I know about it, I'm not in it, so I'm not of authority on it. To me, education is to get the kids to look outside the box.
Mhm.
I was an art teacher, and one of my first things what I had to do at the high school, the first thing I had to do with my kids was stop coloring inside the lines, remove all the lines, and create. And that's what education should be.
Yeah.
You're not going to be a scientist if you can't think outside the box. Now, with the charter schools, the rules are set,
Mhm.
and it's not allowing them to think outside the box. Now, the same money, see, they're taking the money from the public schools
Mhm.
and putting it into the charter schools. Some charter schools are private.
Yeah.
I mean, you can open up a charter school, but where they have them within the school system, that money is diverted
Mhm.
from the main school to these separate schools, which is not a good thing at all. They can take that same money and make great improvements in the school system.
Yeah.
There is no reason why. I know they tried to have charter schools in Maplewood, and they said, "Good God, no! You're not coming in here with that mess."
Right.
But
Yeah.
that has been the whole move. And next to the last person they had in charge of Newark schools, she she closed a whole lot of Newark schools.
Mhm.
There's vacant schools sitting here
Yeah.
on Bergen Street. That big Bergen Street school is vacant. She transferred, I don't know, she did all kinds of things that really was very disruptive to parents. Instead of the kids going to school in their neighborhood,
Mhm.
she shifted them around, which put a problem people with little children
Mhm.
that had to take them all the way somewhere else to school.
Mm.
But it's charter schools,
Mm.
which is private school, which I say becomes elitist education,
Yeah.
and pretty soon you won't have any free public education. My husband's mother is a very interesting lady. Her children, they wanted to put them in not her children, but her daughter wanted to put her children in private schools.
Mm.
And in fact, she put them in private. The old lady had a fit. She said people came from all over the world to America
Mhm.
because they had free public schools. And she said, and you are going to ignore that?
Yeah. That's how my sister feels too. But she's a Jersey City school teacher.
Oh,
So if I was to open a charter school, she would not be happy.
oh, right, yeah. And the thing is, those teachers are not. See, another thing is to bust the unions.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, destroy the unions.
That's a lot of what the charter schools do because they don't allow unions in their schools.
Right.
Which is just another form of exclusion. They're excluding the unions so they can maintain control.
Right.
You know, so it's still going on today. Exclusion is still a main focus of today.
Mm-hmm. public school system is an excellent system, and you see it's public, and you can make all kinds of adjustments and improvements.
Mm.
Now, one thing that I found with my children in public school, as I say, we went to all the PTA meetings, we went to all the board meetings. When something wasn't going right in the school where my kids were, I could go up there, I could talk to the principal, I could do this, I could do that, and they could make adjustments. You can't do that in the charter school.
Mm.
You can't come in. We didn't have a great deal of problems, individual problems, but there was a few.
Mm-hmm.
I know when my two daughters were in school, and of course they come home talking about teachers. This teacher, I'm not going to call his name because I think he may still be in the system, but him and the gym teacher. Whenever boys do something, they beat their heads up against the wall, some kind of something. So next time they had parents' night and we went up to school, my husband wanted to see Mr. Something. I said, "What do you want to see him for? You don't have any kids in his class." "Well, I just want to see him." So he went up and he found him, and he said, "My little boy is 4 years old." He said, "He'll be coming here next year." He said, "And if he presents any problems to you," he said, "don't you be butting his head up against the wall." He says, "You let me know." So the teacher's standing there looking at him. How does he know? But you have control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a parent, and the parents have control. If you have an elected board, they have control. If you don't have these things,
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why they get these gimmicks over on poor people. I think because poor people have to work and they don't have time to go to board meetings, and they don't have,
Mm-hmm.
the mother has to come home and cook dinner and do the laundry and clean up, do this and do that and get the kids ready for school the next day, and she doesn't have time to go to these meetings.
Yeah, and they count on that.
And therefore, whatever happens.
Mm-hmm.
This son here,
Mm-hmm.
I used to go to the library, after my kids got big, I could go to the library in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the youngest one, so he wanted to go to the library with me. I said, "But the children's room isn't open." No, he goes in the New Jersey room. And so he was going to the library with me continually. One of the teachers, we went up there so much the teachers knew us. This one teacher, Mr. Lupo, told me, he said, "Do you know what your son did?" I said, "What?" He said, "This teacher hit a kid. One of the teachers hit a kid. And this little guy gets up and reads article something from the New Jersey state, from the New Jersey corporal punishment in the schools." He was third grade.
Mm.
I think third grade. He gets up and he reads this thing, and this teacher bursts out and starts crying. She runs out the room. And one of the kids said, when he read this one kid said to the teacher, "His father is a lawyer." My husband was a lawyer. So she thought she was in. So she runs into Mr. Lupo's room and she tells him, and he said, "Well, first place, his father is not a lawyer." He said, "And the second place, you shouldn't have hit the kid." He said, "So what we just have to do is see what Leon does."
Mm-hmm.
He said, if he tells his parents, then you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, when this Mr. Lupo told me about it, I said, "No, he didn't tell me." So I asked him about it, and he said that this teacher told him that, he was a smart ass, by the way. He claims he had to go to the bathroom. And So she let him go to the bathroom. So 2, 3 days later, he's got to go to the bathroom. So she told him, she said, you can't go to the bathroom. He said, well, I can't wet on myself. She said, well, you can't go to the bathroom. She didn't think he had to go to the bathroom. He probably didn't have to go to the bathroom. She said, if you go to the bathroom, she says, I'm going to hit whatever his friend's name was. So he went to the bathroom, and when he came back, she whacked the kid. And I guess he was planning the whole thing, and then he grabs his piece of paper out, and he reads to her public law, whatever it is, of corporal punishment in public
See, he was
schools.
gonna be a lawyer way back then.
That's what he was going to the library with me for. He was copying this.
Okay.
But he said, as when he got grown, he said, you know, I was amazed. He said my oldest daughter was the one that told him, because he told her about the teacher hitting the kid.
Mm-hmm.
And she told him that there was a law that says teachers can't do that. So she told him what the law was. And he said, when I read that in the library, he said, and I read a whole lot of laws. He said, you know, I did not know. He said, I thought adults could do anything they wanted to do. He said, and when I read that, and I realized that there's rules for adults also.
Yeah. Enlighten them on. That's a good bit. That enlightened him on a whole career path. Now he's a judge.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, he decided he liked that. He liked having that information that you can.
Information gave him the power.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That's a good story. Is there anything further that you could tell me maybe about how Newark maybe what was when you came, right? Whether there was any kind of like back in the 40s, I know that they used to have laws written where you couldn't get regular loans from the bank to own a house. Did you experience any of that?
No, because I didn't have the money to buy. I wasn't in the market for buying a house. I can tell you the difference that I feel from when I first came to Newark
Mm-hmm.
and now. I can speak only from a black or minority point of view, is the changes that I have seen at the time when I came. Let's see, the mayors were let's say it was, I don't know quite how to put it, somebody who had lived here longer than I was said that they used to not want, black folks couldn't come downtown certain times and things like that. I didn't experience any of that. But I think Newark is a much better city now than it was. It was in the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s. I tell you one thing that I noticed a big difference, and that is in industry. And there was a time in Newark when we were here, when they had all the factories down on Freeland Heights and they were doing all that. And people, there's a lot of employment. I think there's no industry here in Newark.
Yeah.
Newark has become more of a commercial city, really. There's no industry here.
Yeah, now it's prudential. May.
Yeah. And you do, and see, that's another problem with the city. You have all these big companies here, but you don't have the local citizens working on them.
True. Something like 14%.
In fact, I did a painting, and it's called Urban Renewal, and has a bridge And that bridge is from Penn Station to Gateway 1,
Mm.
where the people can come in, go to work, and never touch ground, or just walk a couple of blocks.
Mhm.
But they don't have enough businesses. I mean, they don't have enough time in the city to even spend any of the money that they earn here.
Yeah.
Now that's to me that's a big problem.
Mhm. Yes, it is.
I know when they they started some sort of stuff about they were going to get some murals, from all over the world to come to Newark and paint murals.
Mm.
And the artists, we got in an uproar. We said, "Oh no, you can't do that.
Yeah, that,
You have to hire some Newark artists.
mhm.
You're not going to have people come in here and get money for painting murals and go on back to wherever they came from to spend the money."
Yeah. Mm.
No.
And what would they know about painting murals of Newark for Newark?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's another form of exclusion, true.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Well, we put our foot down on that, and that's when they did the ones on the on the wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were doing they have the city mural
Along the
projects,
wall
but,
of McCarter Highway.
But that's a big problem in Newark, is you have these companies here, but the people don't live here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I remember there was a time, I'm trying to think which mayor it was, passed an ordinance that in order to work in Newark and any of the city things, you had to live in Newark.
Mm.
But I don't think that's so anymore. I think it got bypassed.
Yeah.
But I
That
remember the
definitely-
librarian at the
because-
library, she said she was going to have to leave because she wasn't going to move to Newark.
Mhm. Yes.
But I guess he could see the problem too, see
Yeah.
it coming.
Yeah, I think Ryan Haygood said there's 15% of those that work in Newark and live in Newark. I think that's how low the percentage
Oh,
is.
yeah.
You know, because I had asked the mayor when I seen him, because one of my jobs is Express Newark, and they have the WBGO has
yeah,
their
yeah.
thing there every
Right.
third Thursday. So the mayor's there every third Thursday. So, and he was talking about Amazon coming in,
Mm-hmm.
or that having in talks with it. I asked him, "Are you gonna, give a presentation that they have to actually, start hiring people and maybe make it a Newark first? If you have two applicants that are equal, the one from Newark should get the job, And he said, "Well, we're gonna look at that," but he didn't give me a definite answer. I don't know if he could give me a definite answer at that time, but I think that's something that needs to be looked at
yeah.
even today. And I don't know if they're just purposely excluding people from Newark, or they're just bringing these companies in and just bringing their own people with them. But I know that has to change. If you're gonna have all this big influx, all these corporations coming up, how does it benefit the people?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
Mhm.
It's no jobs in not no jobs, but
Yeah.
and you see you brought up another thing here as far as education. When my children were little,
Mhm.
before the great exodus, a lot of the teachers lived in Newark.
Mhm.
In fact, a friend of mine and I were talking about it. She grew up in Newark. And she said, you go downtown shopping and you see your teacher. She said, you go to the supermarket and you see your teacher. She said, I think that had a big hold on the children in the community. They just the teachers were part of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But I know when I was teaching, the kids said, "You live in Newark?" I said, "Of course I live in Newark." "You do? Why not?" Look, I'm a city person.
Mm-hmm.
I know when we were going to buy the house, my husband says, I would like to have a farm. I said, "Good for you." I said, "But I'm not getting up in the morning going out saying good morning to the chickens." I said, "I'm going out and say, hi, neighbor."
Mm-hmm.
Never mind the chickens. Oh, I hated the farm. When I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
at the summer, your parents, they're going to get you out the city.
Mm-hmm.
So you go. I had family who had farms in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God. I was scared of the pigs. I was scared. And the worst thing in the world is a doggone goose. But so Newark is a nice city for me.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I liked Newark. I liked living in Newark more than I did in New York. Because in Newark, you had grass, and houses and things like that, which is more like Chicago to me.
Mm.
Apartment buildings, city. I guess New York was a city too, but it was actually living in Manhattan was not the same as to me as living in the city.
Mm.
I guess if I lived in Brooklyn or places where they had grass and stuff like that, I would like it better. But I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, if there's anything else that you would like for me to talk about, I don't know.
I think that pretty much covers it. This is great. I love this. I appreciate this so much.
Let's see if I can think of any.
Yeah, I'm sure later on down the road when I'm looking at this, oh man, we should.
Yeah,
But that's always the case.
yeah.
All right. I appreciate this very much, and I thank you. And if there's nothing more than that you would like to add, then
I can't think of anything.
okay.
Oh, I'll tell you one thing. I was looking at the television and they're talking about, I'm trying to think what it was. Anyway, I said, my God, I was doing that when I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. And that was when I was at the Art Institute, as I told you. I was, 19 years old, and just a kid, really. And I get tied up with these Norman Thomas socialists. And as I told you, all the groups are trying to recruit. They had parties this Saturday. The communists, young communists, and the young socialists, and the Zionist Jews, and everything. They had parties on Saturday night, trying to recruit.
Mm-hmm.
And I got, for some reason, the Norman Thomas socialists were a little more appealing to me. They weren't as, whatever. And what they were doing was they were sitting in. This is long before the Southern students were sitting in. You go in a restaurant that doesn't serve blacks. And there was plenty of that in Chicago. It was very segregated, by the way. In fact, Martin Luther King said that the response that he got in Chicago was worse than any he'd ever got in the South.
Yeah.
And anyway, we would go into these restaurants on Saturday night. Go into these restaurants that don't serve black people. So the first time they got me to go on one, I had no idea what it was going to be like. But in Chicago, there's neighborhoods this is all black, this is all Irish, this is all Polish, this is Jewish. If I gave you my phone number, you'd know whether I was Irish, Polish, or black. And you black folks just didn't get caught on these, at sundown, that sort of thing. Anyway, we go to this place and we get here and we go in and I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the heck did I let these people talk me into this? Will I come out of this alive? And so we go in and we sit down. And the man comes over, the manager, the waitress says, I'll get the manager. And the manager comes over and he says, we don't serve niggers here. And so we just keep sitting there. And I think that I want to get out of here. And then they said, so he says, well, he was going to call the police. So he called the police. And I thought, I don't want to walk out of here because it's not safe. Not safe out there in the street with these people. Anyway, the police come and they escort us out and we leave. And I think to myself, oh my God, I will never do that again. But I did.
Mm.
But I'm thinking now that's back way back in the 40s.
Mm.
We were doing that dumb stuff. Well, it really wasn't dumb
It
stuff.
wasn't
but,
done, no. And it was a statement that needed to be made.
But and I was thinking, you know, these whenever I saw on television and they were showing people sitting in, I thought, well, geez, I was doing that years ago.
Yeah, and it's still going on. The fight has to struggle. I think sometimes what happens is people think like the civil rights movement. People thought they had gotten these gains, and then they moved on with their life, and kind of things regressed back. And now it's at a point now where people have to start standing up and saying, you know, what happened to the equal rights we were guaranteed, you know?
Well, and this Martin Luther King thing that they were showing, it was very interesting because it's true.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain gains, but what happened was the black folks who gained some economic
Mm-hmm.
gains, they moved on. You know, they didn't.
They did the white flight.
Yeah. I know a lot of friends who moved out and sent their kids. I remember this child had to take a train to school every day. I thought I wouldn't put my kid through that. Because there's something very important, I'd say, in a segregated society. I'm not saying that segregation is good, but I was on a panel once with 4 women. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. 1 was Spanish and 3 were black. And we were talking about, you know, how we became artists and how our families reacted, and etc. And I learned something very interesting because 2 of the black women, one had been raised in a all-white community here in New Jersey, in Kearney. She and her brother and sister were the only black kids in the school. There were only black people that even lived there. This other one was a black upper middle class. This one was not upper middle class. This one was poor. And I realized with the both of them, when they did their artwork, they were putting a lot of African symbols and all that sort of stuff. And I couldn't understand why they did. And I realized, and then as they talked, both of them, this one said that her mother they were not allowed to have watermelon. They never had watermelon in their house. And this one was saying something else. And me and this other one that was raised in the black community, I realized there's a certain security that prepares you to face the integrated world, where these people had already had problems defining themselves.
Right.
Where in segregated community, you define yourself before you leave it. They were not able to define themselves.
So they had
because they were weird, both of them.
So they had to express it through the symbolism in their art.
The symbolism in their work and many other things. You know, I got to, the one of them I got to appreciate her much more when I heard that from her. because before that uh, she was very difficult. Like we were in Atlantic City one time, and we went into this dress shop, and she wanted to go in there and look around, so I went in there with her, and so the clerk came over to her and said something. She said to her, no, she didn't have. Let me think. Oh, she was looking at something, and the clerk tells her how much it is.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, okay. And then she looked at something else, and the clerk was telling her how much it is. So she said, well, I'm going to get. So she bought.
Mm.
I was shocked because I know she did not have the money. She was a teacher just like I was. She didn't have no $600 to be paying for this dress.
But
She bought it just to show the woman.
that you could.
And I thought, my God, this is crazy. And see, in my situation, I didn't have to prove anything to the lady.
Right.
And I realized that there's a certain, not that segregation is good, but there's a certain, in a segregated society,
Mm-hmm.
you need to have strength.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you don't, and if it's weeded out of you while you're little,
If you grow up and people are always telling you that there's something wrong with you, of course then you develop this not having your own identity, as you
yeah,
said.
that's what happened with them. And I realized that was, but I never even thought about it before.
Right. Whereas your entire community, you could always feel accepted as equal. Where back in them days, they probably were not treated like they belonged to the society.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I get that, and that's one of the things that needs to change. But how do you go about the change?
Oh, that takes time.
It
That takes time.
takes time, and it takes enlightenment. It takes truth and education, rather than just teaching one side of the story. You got to teach the whole story.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's something that needs to be further advanced in our education system.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate this, and I don't know if there's any more that you have. If not, then I gotta hit the note.
I don't think so. I think I've talked a lot.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking for almost
I didn't
an hour.
tie it
40.
all together, but
No,
you
but-
tied it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I really appreciate this. This has been very, very amazing for me, and I thank you so much.
Oh,
I'm gonna shut down now. I thought I shut it off.